All right, today's lesson, we're going to start by looking at photosynthesis and cellular respiration and how the two processes are related. So in photosynthesis, photosynthesis is occurring in chloroplasts in autotrophs. So autotrophs are those organisms that can make their own food. So they're converting solar energy, in this case, into chemical energy. And they can store this in sugars and other carbohydrates. The byproducts of photosynthesis are oxygen, molecules of ATP, and some heat. Some of the energy-rich compounds that result from photosynthesis are used up immediately, and some get stored as starch or converted to fat for future use. In cellular respiration, this is occurring in the mitochondria in the cell, and it occurs in plants, animals, and other multicellular organisms. And basically, it's the breakdown of carbohydrates and fats to generate molecules of ATP. So ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate, and it is the source of energy that all organisms use for cellular activities. So here is just a diagram or model of an ATP molecule. So again, it's the source of energy for many activities, such as muscle contraction, cell division, flagella movement, and cilia movement. The adenosine part of ATP is made up of a molecule called adenine. So right here, it's a nitrogenous base. It's bonded to a ribose. This is a sugar. It's a 5-carbon sugar. And then we have the 3 phosphate groups. So 1, 2, and 3. And there are also high energy bonds between those phosphate groups. So our bodies use about 40 kilograms of ATP daily. So the amount of ATP available at any moment is enough to meet only immediate cellular needs. So ATP has to be synthesized constantly. So here is just another model showing ATP. So you've got the sugar here, the adenine, and then the 3 phosphates here, the P's representing those phosphate groups. So photosynthesis produces the energy-rich chemical glucose, and then cellular respiration will break down that glucose, for example, and generate the ATP. And ATP is the energy currency of cells. When cells need energy, they're going to spend ATP. So it's got the 3 phosphate groups. When one high energy phosphate bond is broken, energy is released, and the result is ADP. The D will stand for diphosphate, meaning 2. So that's what we see here. So we see in this continuous cycle, we see the release of a phosphate group from ATP, and then the subsequent regeneration of ATP from ADP. It creates this continuous cycle. So when the bond to that 3rd phosphate group in ATP breaks, so there's 3 phosphate groups, one of them will break off, the energy from ATP is released. That reaction produces ADP, just 2 phosphate groups. And then there is 1 free phosphate group right there in the middle. All right, so adenosine plus 2 phosphate groups, that's ADP. Then you have that free phosphate group shown right here. ATP will then get regenerated by the addition of that free phosphate group P to the ADP to form ATP again. All right, and that does require an input of energy. So molecules of ATP get broken down and regenerated thousands of times each day. The chemical energy that's released when the bond to that 3rd phosphate group is broken enables the cellular activities to take place. All right, so again, we have ATP here. One of them is going to break off. Energy is going to be released for body processes. It's going to form ADP. You have 1 free phosphate floating around. Eventually, it's going to regenerate to ATP again, and the cycle will continue. Okay, let's just take a look at some typical questions. Number 1, what's the purpose of facilitated diffusion? So recall from last class, this is when molecules can move down their concentration gradient. They don't need any energy. So they're just moving from high concentration to low concentration. Maybe because of their size, they're unable to go right across the cell membrane. So they usually need some sort of protein channel to go through. But it is facilitated diffusion, meaning they don't need any ATP. Question 2, where does a cell get energy for active transport? So recall, active transport requires energy because they are moving against their concentration gradient. So cells get their energy from ATP, which is adenosine triphosphate, when the phosphate bond gets broken. What is ATP used for? For anything that requires energy. So active transport, cell division, movement, muscle contraction, synthesis of proteins and other molecules. It all requires the energy stored in ATP. How does ATP supply energy to the cell? So stored chemical energy gets released when the bond to the third phosphate group breaks. That will then fuel many cellular functions. Chloroplasts are the site of photosynthesis. Within chloroplasts, there is chlorophyll. This is the green colored molecules that will trap solar energy, and it is contained within the chloroplasts. Chloroplasts are bound by two membranes. They have an outer membrane and an inner membrane. I'm just going to go back and forth between the diagrams here. All right, so here we can see the inner and outer membranes right here in the diagram. The fluid inside the inner space of a chloroplast, that is called the stroma. It contains a mixture of proteins and other chemicals that are used in the synthesis of carbohydrates. Just going back here, you can see the stroma right here and right here. Okay, so that's that fluid portion. Then there is a third membrane system within the stroma, and it is organized into interconnected flattened sacs, which are called thylakoids. So let's just go back here. So these stacks, each one of them are called thylakoids. And when we stack those thylakoids together, they're called grana. And singular would be granum. So this is one granum made up of stacked thylakoids. But there are many of them in here, so the plural would be grana. And then chlorophyll molecules are located in the thylakoid membranes of the chloroplast. All right, so that's the structure of chloroplast. This is the site of photosynthesis. So you do need to know the structure here. The inner and outer membranes, the thylakoids, which are stacked to form grana, and then the stroma, which is the fluid portion. And the fluid portion, that's where the chemical reactions take place that synthesize carbohydrates. Mitochondria, this is the site of cellular respiration. All right, and this is occurring in the cells of all eukaryotic organisms. So in plants, in animals, in fungi and protists, they all contain mitochondria. So these are the organelles that enable cells to efficiently extract energy from their food. Mitochondria are bounded by two membranes. So let's just take a look at the picture of a mitochondria. So we have an inner membrane and the outer membrane. And the fluid-filled space of the inner membrane is called the matrix. All right, so here we can see the matrix in here as well as right here, this purple area. The matrix contains proteins and other chemicals needed to break down carbohydrates and other high-energy molecules. The inner membrane has numerous folds. Those are called cristae. So these are those folds. Those are called cristae. And those cristae are there. They provide a large surface area for the production of ATP. All right, so you do need to know the structure of a mitochondria and all the different parts we just labeled. This is where glucose is being broken down during cellular respiration. And just a quick note here, cells that use large amounts of energy, like the muscle cells and liver cells, they may contain as many as 1,000 mitochondria. Okay, so next we're going to talk about the metabolic pathways that are occurring for cellular reactions. So in a metabolic pathway, basically what's happening is the product of one reaction becomes the starting reactant for another. So when we talk about metabolism, this is referring to all the chemical reactions that occur within a cell to support and sustain its life functions. So plants and animals rely on metabolic pathways to store and provide energy. And then these pathways can be summarized by using the word metabolism. So photosynthesis and cellular respiration are two important pathways. So when we look at the equations, we have for photosynthesis, it's 6 carbon dioxide plus 6 water plus energy from sun produces the glucose plus oxygen. Then when we look at the equation for cellular respiration, the starting point is glucose plus oxygen forming 6 carbon dioxide plus 6 water plus energy. Okay, keep in mind these are summary statements. Both of these processes, they have a series of reactions that use initial reactants to produce final products. But here on, when we just look at the reactions, they look like the reverse reaction to the first one. But we're going to be working through those reactions quite a bit more. So when we talk about these two reactions, catabolic pathways, they break larger molecules into smaller ones. So cellular respiration is a catabolic reaction. Energy is being released in this process. And anabolic pathways, they form larger molecules from smaller ones. So photosynthesis is an anabolic reaction, and energy is required for this process. All right, enzymes help with, they catalyze cellular metabolism and energy production. They're specialized proteins. They lower the energy needed to activate biological reactions. So they are biological catalysts that reduce the amount of startup energy needed for the reactions in the metabolic pathways. If we didn't have enzymes, the reactions could not occur at the temperatures at which we, as living organisms, at which we thrive at. So these enzymes are necessary for these metabolic reactions. Okay, the reactions can be linked through oxidation and reduction. Oxidation is when an atom or molecule loses an electron. It is therefore said to be oxidized. Reduction is when an atom or molecule gains an electron, and it's said to be reduced. So when one compound is oxidized, when it loses electrons, another compound has to be reduced. It has to gain the electrons. All compounds or atoms, they contain more energy in their reduced form than they do in the oxidized form. So for example, glucose, which is an energy-rich compound, it is in its reduced form. Molecules that are in their reduced form, they contain a large amount of available energy, and they're said to have reducing power. All right, so here is just a quick diagram showing oxidation and reduction. These two reactions, they take place at the same time. So if one compound is being oxidized, another compound is being reduced. So when one compound is losing an electron, another compound gains those electrons. And usually these two reactions, oxidation and reduction, they're usually called redox reactions for short. All right, so one way to remember that oxidation is losing of electrons and reduction is gaining of electrons is remembering this statement, which is Leo the lion goes grr. So lose E electrons, it's oxidation. gain, the G, electrons, E is reduction, R. So Leo, the lion, goes grr. All right, so just a quick summary then. When electrons transfer in a chemical equation, it's called a redox reaction, which is an oxidation and reduction reaction. So for example, oxidation, water loses electrons and hydrogen ions to become oxygen, so it becomes oxidized. Reduction, example, carbon dioxide gains those electrons and hydrogen ions to become glucose, so it's reduced. So the overall reaction of photosynthesis is an oxidation reduction or redox reaction. In the first step, oxygen in water is oxidized by the light energy. This means the water molecule has lost electrons, Leo, and then the hydrogen and electron from water are transferred to this molecule called NAD+, NADP+, which we will talk a little bit more about when we get into photosynthesis a little bit more. So NAD+, NADP+ forms NADPH, and then NADPH now has the electrons to reduce the carbon in carbon dioxide in a series of reactions to result in a carbohydrate molecule. And again, we'll learn more about that in later classes. So in order for a glucose molecule to be created, more than one water molecule and more than one carbon dioxide molecule are involved, which is why when we see the balanced chemical equation, it's 6 carbon dioxide plus 6 water to form the glucose and 6 oxygens. All right, and then when we have cellular respiration, glucose is oxidized and oxygen gets reduced. So we see the opposite. So here, oxygen, we see electrons are gained, oxidation number decreases, and then in oxidation, electrons are lost, oxidation number increases. All right, just some quick questions here. A molecule such as NADP+ can be reduced to NADPH. NADPH is said to have reducing power. What does that mean? So that just means that it has the power to reduce another compound. So basically, NADPH now has an electron available to donate for another compound to be reduced. And then hydrogen ions are also called protons. So when we talk further, and I say protons, it's also the same for hydrogen ions. So hydrogen ions and protons are the same thing. All right, so just in summary for today's lesson, photosynthesis and cellular respiration are metabolic pathways. These pathways break down or synthesize carbon dioxide, water, carbohydrates, oxygen, and ATP. The creation or breakdown of these important molecules is reliant on oxidation reduction reactions, also called redox reactions. We're going to learn about the electron transport systems and chemiosmosis, but we talked about how these reactions are occurring in the mitochondrion and in the chloroplast. All right, we'll stop here and watch this quick video on what is ATP.